In American society, money is a taboo topic. We're taught at a young age it's improper to talk about it, but we're also bombarded with messages about the power and importance of money in our everyday lives. And by not talking about it, we miss out on the skills and lessons we need to effectively understand and financially plan. That changes today. Welcome to Money Tales. Hosted by Sandy Brager and Cami Doder, Money Tales brings more than 35 years of combined professional experience in personal finance to demystify money and demonstrate what it's like to speak openly about personal financial matters. Join us each episode as they interview modern-day movers and shakers about how money decisions intertwine with their daily lives in order to give you better insight into productive financial conversations. Subscribe today and register for our blog Fathom at aspiriant.com/podcasts to increase your money mojo. And now, here's Cami and Sandy.
On Money Tales this week, we explore the opportunity to change the world one person at a time. Our guest is Emily Chang. Emily's financial adventures began in her early 20s in the most unexpected way. One frigid night, Emily found a young girl huddled by the roadside, clearly beaten and wearing nothing but a windbreaker. She took the girl to a diner, offered her a meal, and then invited her to stay in her spare room for the night. That one night turned into a week, then months, until Emily could help her find stability. Emily's family worried the girl might steal or harm her, but Emily chose to see the potential for good. She helped not just that one girl, but went on to assist 17 individuals over the next 23 years, transforming lives one by one. Let me tell you more about Emily. She is an acknowledged thought leader in digital customer experience, workplace culture, and business strategy, who is currently CEO of VML West. Before joining VML, Emily was CEO of McCann World Group in China, and before that, Chief Marketing Officer at Starbucks China. She's a servant leader who gives back by teaching and sharing with next-gen leaders. Emily recently published a best-selling book called The Spare Room, telling the stories of the 17 children she and her family have cared for in their spare room.
Here are 3 key money topics Emily hits on in this conversation. First, she grew up within an immigrant family in the United States, and when it came to spending money, Emily's parents constantly questioned why she wanted to spend it on certain things. She says this gave her an opportunity to define what was most important to her and manage her resources in a way that's different than how society shapes choices and identity. Second, how money is temporary, but the things we do with it can have impact that reverberates forever. And third, how Emily is focused on inspiring people to define their social legacy. For her, that means discovering where your unique skills, experience, and personality traits intersect with something happening in the world that you can't just walk by and allow to continue to happen. We hope you share this episode with a friend, and please subscribe to Money Tales on your favorite podcast platform. Now on to our conversation with Emily Chang.
Welcome to the Money Tales podcast. I'm Cami Doder.
And I'm Sandy Brager. Cami, it's been a little while since I've talked about a book that my team and I are reading at Aspiriant, and I wanted to talk about the one we're reading currently, which is How to Know a Person by David Brooks.
Sounds interesting.
It is very interesting. A key ingredient to the work we do at Aspiriant is really understanding who our clients are, what's most important to them, what they value, and having these really close relationships matter. The book has all kinds of interesting tips around getting to know someone, as you would expect from the title. There's a chapter on good talks, and I wanted to share 3 of the tips in this chapter with Money Tales listeners because I thought they're brilliant for money conversations in particular. First is be a loud listener. When we think about talking and having conversations, we talk about our participation sharing, but a really big piece of this conversation is listening. He talks about the importance of listening loudly, really pouring in, making it active. He used Oprah Winfrey as an example of someone who's a loud listener. So I thought that was really cool.
That's beautiful.
A second one is keep the gem statement at the center. So really focusing on what is the most important thing you're trying to convey in this conversation so that you don't get lost, especially if there's conflict in the conversation. This is helpful in money conversations because if you're talking about a money topic and your conversation partner is not on the same page as you, reminding them that you're in the conversation because you care about them, you care about that gem that you're trying to get through, that can really help ground the conversation.
I appreciate the use of the word gem because it's so positive versus it could be a conflicting, challenging conversation, but just even saying there's something special in there. I like that.
Our relationship's really important to me and I want to make sure we're on the same page. The third tip that I wanted to share today was don't be a topper, which I thought was really funny, but it's the idea of not hijacking a conversation. So if someone is sharing something with you, especially when it's a money topic, really being there and listening to what they're saying as opposed to trying to jump in and top them and say, oh yeah, I've had that experience and it was like this, taking over the conversation. There's a quote in this section that I want to read. It's not David Brooks' quote. It's another journalist, Monica Guzman. He quotes her as saying, the experience of being listened to all the way on something until your meaning is completely clear to another human being is currently rare in life.
It's true.
That really hit me hard. And it makes me appreciative of these Money Tales conversations we're having every week with our guests, where we get to practice some of these same skills.
This don't be a topper. It kind of struck me like, what's a topper? The minute you said that, I thought, oh God, I might do that a lot. I'm not trying to top someone, but I'm like, oh yeah, yeah. And you think you're adding to the conversation, but you're sort of cutting them off.
We all want to share experiences and say, yep, we've had the same money situation too. But being in that conversation and listening to what the other person's saying can be more helpful sometimes.
Well, I'm excited to be a loud listener with our guest today on Money Tales. Welcome, Emily Chang. It's a treat to be talking with you today.
Thanks for having me.
Would you introduce yourself and in doing so share a couple pivotal moments that have taken place in your life that really impacted who you are?
My name's Emily Chang. I am a mother of a 15-year-old daughter. I'm married just coming on 25 years to a Korean American. My partner is based in Shanghai, where he runs a nonprofit for the disabled community. And my daughter and I live in LA right now. So we are a bit of a split family, at least for the time being. I have a great job where I look after the West region for VML. In my spare time, I spend a lot of time hiking, which is surprisingly good in LA. I used to live in Seattle, and it turns out LA is right up there in terms of great places to be. I have 2 rescue dogs, so they come with me because my daughter on weekend mornings, not so much. I also wrote a book called The Spare Room, which is all about living with intention and leading with authenticity. It's about contributing more than you consume. So a lot of themes that fit with Money Talks and everything that you guys are bringing to light in your conversations every day.
I can't wait to talk more about that. Before we do, we like to always hear folks' backstory. Would you share, when you were growing up, when did money start having meaning to you?
I grew up as the child of immigrants, so I didn't grow up with a lot of money. We grew up scrappy. We were cold in the winters in upstate New York, and we were hot in the summers. I have to admit, I now, maybe not to that extreme degree, appreciate feeling hot in the summer and cold in the winter, eating the fruits that are ripe in the summer and going with the seasons in that regard. The other thing I'd say about growing up as the child of immigrants is a lot of the people around me didn't understand my background. And so I learned a bit to define what's important to me and how I want to manage my resources separate from how society shapes our choices and our identity. And then third, I married pretty early. I think if you'd known me then, you would not have guessed I would be one of the people who married early. And yet I married a very steady, measured person who, if I think about your earlier question on the pivotal moments that shaped me, I think in my early 20s, getting married to somebody who is so steady and consistent and thoughtful has really been a wonderful balance in my life. So starting from being the child of immigrants, not growing up with a lot, to learning to define who I am and the things that matter to me, and then choosing a spouse who is a very different person and thinks very differently than me has brought me to where I am today.
Emily, tell us more about learning to define who you are and how that came about in your life, especially as it relates to money.
Well, I grew up in upstate New York in Pittsford, which is a very wealthy little town. It's the home of the best grocery store in the world, Wegmans. There's a lot of money in that town. I graduated high school in 94. So put yourself in that era. The parking lot of our high school was filled with these forest green Jeep Cherokees, red Corvettes. There was sort of a row of each. And I felt really blessed that I even had a car, but it was this beater gray Ford Tempo GL that was an automatic, and it didn't run unless you constantly fed it gas, even when you were braking. So I learned to drive with 2 feet on an automatic.
Oh, man.
It did not fit the parking lot. You go through periods where you're a little embarrassed, but ultimately you're grateful your parents even got you a car and you have a way to get around. I think about not really having parents who understood trends. I remember tree torns were a very popular shoe. Everybody had tree torn shoes and Umbro shorts, even though I didn't play soccer. And I wanted them because everybody had them. My parents couldn't understand, why would you spend this much money on a pair of sneakers that aren't even very good? Trying to explain those things to them and ultimately hearing my own voice and thinking, why do I want them? And I think that is a little bit of, Sandy, why I think I had the opportunity to define what was important to me, because everything was questioned. So it wasn't just an automatic, well, all the other kids have it. Oh, yeah, of course, I've seen all my friends' kids have it, because my parents' friends' kids were also all Chinese, and we all hung out in a little Chinese American microcosm. And therefore, you do have to interrogate a little bit the choices. And money doesn't come as easily to our family back then. So you have to understand what you're asking for, the value proposition, and does it really matter? And does it matter because it defines your social state, or does it matter because it enriches your life?
So when you were heading off to college, so you're thinking about your values and what's important to you, what did you decide? Where did you go to school? And what was driving some of those decisions?
My parents will hate that I'm sharing the story, but I didn't choose. I had chose the University of Miami in Ohio because I was pre-med and it's such a good medical school. And then when I went to my parents and said, I think I need to get luggage, because you see all these Target ads on TV where kids are buying laundry hampers and getting their stuff packed for school. I think I need to do that. And they said, no, you don't. You're going to the University of Rochester. And they had given me a full ride. And they said, look, if it's us paying for a college education, we get to make the choice. It seemed very fair to me, actually. I didn't get very upset. I thought, well, that's fair enough. And so I went to the University of Rochester. I think it taught me a lot of valuable lessons. One, I think that's a fair point, but it's nice to kind of set the expectation up front.
Oh, so you didn't know about it ahead of time?
No. 2 weeks. Yeah. And I said, how did you, but didn't I send in the application? They said, oh yeah, we told them you declined it. That's a very Chinese way to do things. It's meant well, and it's very pragmatic. I think I learned a degree of pragmatism, but I also learned the Western way, which is maybe to set expectations and build a little bit of relationship along the way. But you also realize wherever you go to school, I've been talking to my daughter now about this as we're starting to consider colleges for her. I said, wherever you end up, hon, you're going to be great. Because it's not the school, it's not the prestige of the brand, it's what you make of the experience, as in everything in life.
It's so interesting that you've been able to navigate two different worlds living in upstate New York with your immigrant parents. When you were in school, did you continue on the pre-med track?
I did. I was biology and I had a minor in chemical engineering. So we sort of cobbled together, before it was officially a thing, a biomedical engineering degree in that respect.
And Emily, were you thinking about money in college?
Yes, I did have to think about money. I paid for my own apartment, my car, my gas, my books. Books are maybe the most expensive thing, at least in retrospect. It's how it feels. I had 3 jobs in college, so I didn't have a traditional college degree. I think I felt like I needed to take care of myself at that point, and I needed to pay for my own way. And I also love to work. To this day, I still really enjoy throwing myself into it, to the point where I need to almost self-manage, because I love that feeling when you're racing and there's so much happening and it's very exciting. And you look at your watch, you're like, oh my gosh, it's 5 p.m. I feel like I just woke up. That's a great feeling for me. But you can also burn yourself out and not make enough time for rest and exercise, which is something that I've been doing lately. The 3 jobs kept things really interesting. I felt like I was racing through life and I loved it. I definitely made enough money to not have to worry or feel like I couldn't find the next meal or couldn't afford new textbooks if I wanted them. But it came at a cost. I didn't know the cost until maybe quite recently, when I started realizing this racing pace that I love maybe isn't the best thing for me. It's fun and thrilling, but there are moments where you can choose to take your foot off the pedal and find that you fill your time with other things at a more leisurely pace. And that's not always a bad thing.
It's hard once you're on the wheel. And if you've got that personality, looking at your background on LinkedIn, you've done a lot. I'm curious, as you were going through your career, maybe you can share some of the highlights and learning lessons along the way that relate to your relationship with money.
I went to medical school because very late in the process, after I had already been admitted to medical school, I realized I didn't have the emotional distance to be a pediatric oncologist. Therefore, I shifted to business school. So I went straight into business school from undergrad, and then I had to pay for it. That was an expensive MBA, but it gave me a chance to pause and think for the first time, if I'm not going to be a pediatric oncologist, what do I want to do with my life? And right around that point, between undergrad and graduate school, I ran across a little girl who was sitting right outside Elmwood Avenue, right by the University of Rochester. And she had been huddled on the side of the street. I ended up unrolling my window and asking her if she was okay. She had clearly just been beaten up. I ended up bringing her to a diner that night and getting her a meal, and then realized that for whatever reason, later the story unfolded, she had nothing but the windbreaker on her back in Rochester winter and nothing else. And so I just said, do you want to just stay in my spare room? So she stayed in my spare room for a night and then for a week. And then she stayed with me for a couple of months until we could get her into a stable situation. And I think that was my first major experience with money, because my parents are very Chinese. And I remember them calling and saying, there's not enough in this world. There's always this mindset of you have to have everything, hoard everything. Money is coveted and necessary for life. And you don't even know this person. And of course, it goes straight to like the worst case scenario. What if she steals from you? I'm thinking, I'm a poor college kid. What is she going to steal? What if she hurts you? And I think those are all the voices that stay with me from my parents. And I appreciate that, because having a tempered approach and thinking about worst case scenario is important. And yet for me, my mind goes to, but what if something good happens? And what if we're able to put her in a better situation? And so I feel like I always have these two extremes in my mind. What if turned out to be very positive? She ended up living with another family. I got to go to her high school graduation. As she moved out of my apartment, she introduced another girl she had met on the street, who then moved in with me. And then I had numbers 1 and 2 out of 17 over the last 23 years that really reframed my view of money. More than any job that I've had, throughout every job, I've had different kids in my spare room. The job is delightful. As I said, I pour myself into my work and I love it. And it is a means to support my initial ambition, which is to be a pediatric oncologist. I wanted to help kids in need. As a full-time job, that would have literally killed me. But on the side, being able to take care of a couple of kids in my spare room and still do a job in corporate that I absolutely love, which then funds my ability to help kids, turned out to be the perfect ecosystem.
Say more about how your work with these kids have helped you learn about money. It sounds like you're working not only for yourself and your family, but also to do these amazing things for people who really need it.
3 things come to mind. The first one is I've come on this really simple formula. This is how I want to live. And our family wants to live this way, which is to contribute more than we consume. That's really important to us. When I die, I don't want to think I consumed it all. I hoarded it all. With respect to my parents, I want a very different mindset. I want to think I gave it all away. What I want said about me when I pass is she died empty. There's no time I withheld. There's no resource. There's no money. There's no spirit of generosity that was restrained. That's one. Living into the spare room has helped me feel how incredibly additive that life approach really is. The second thing is money serves us. We don't serve money. So having funds enables me to support these kids. Even though I love my job is not just a means to an end. I really thrive in it and I love the people I work with, and it serves us because then we're able to serve these kids. And the third thing is to hold it loosely. Money's temporary. When we die, we don't take it with us. I'm sure lots of people have said that. But the impact we can have with this temporary currency can reverberate forever. I have a fourth thing, which is right now, one of my spare room kids from 20 years ago He and his wife are living in my spare studio, detached in our home right now. And I'll tell you a vulnerable story about this. They moved in, we're in Los Angeles. It's a very nice house with a full detached studio, 600 square feet. You can imagine it's not cheap. I wanted to do this because I really want to help them get the space and time needed to work on their craft. They want to enter the creative field. You need space for that. And you can't be constantly hustling to try and just make enough to live somewhere. So I wanted that for them. And yet I struggled with the role money played. I still wanted to contribute more than I consume. I believed that money would serve us in this situation, but I wasn't holding it loosely. When we invited them to live with us, it was not ever intended to be a fair exchange of value. And yet sometimes I would see them going on vacation, or I'd be working my ass off and I would look in the backyard and just see them hanging out, eating fruit and reading books. And there's a seed of resentment that started to take root. And I could hear it in my daughter's voice too. Like, wow, mom, they seem to have a really good life. And look how hard you're working, traveling every week. And then we both had to calibrate because suddenly this couple is so delightful. I'm sure they sense this on some level because we're humans. They serve us. They would take the dogs for the day. They would watch over my daughter when I'm traveling. And it just gave me that extra sense of security. And then some delightful things. I went in the backyard and they're like 100 tiny cacti, the cute little bubbly ones and the cute little growing ones. The backyard is so whimsical and charming. And that's not something I would have ever thought to do. It's not an equal exchange of values, and it's not co-living, and it's not communal living. To me, it's shared living. Everybody brings what they can bring. And I am able to delight them in some ways, and they are able to absolutely delight me in other ways. So I'm still learning every day.
I'm so glad you shared that story, and especially the feelings that you and your daughter were having around, hey, wait, is this right? Is this what we wanted? And I'm curious, how did you guys begin to open your eyes to the delights that the couple was bringing to see that exchange when you were in that moment of, I'm working really hard and they're enjoying life? There's a disconnect.
I think two things happened. One of our longest term spare room kids is named Teo. He's in my book and he's in my TEDx talk. We ended up seeing him. So we stay in touch with his family. We see him a couple times a year, and we had just reconnected with the family, the McClures. Is always so joyful and humbling to remember that we just got to be a little part of his life's journey. That's a great way to remember that you're not giving for somebody to say thank you. You're giving because you have chosen in your heart that this is the right thing to do. And the second thing is giving is not sacrificial. Seeing Teo again always reminds me we got so much more out of that relationship than he ever did. People will say things like, oh, he was so lucky to come in contact with you. He's not the lucky one. The way that we have grown and deepened and become more wise and thoughtful about the world and our role within it, giving teaches us all of that. So that was one thing, is seeing Teo. And the other thing is we were just talking. So we share living. So we were in the backyard and Hannah said something really beautiful. I was talking about finding our tribe, because a lot of what we do in life is try to find those who are like-minded, share philosophy, and we just love each other, because ultimately what it does is validate ourselves. So that's okay. I love finding my tribe. And then she said, we're less of a tribe. We're probably more of a village. And I thought that was the most profound thing I'd heard all month. It's absolutely true. We're not like-minded. If you saw each other, us on the street, you wouldn't think those people probably live in the same property. You would never think that. And yet we do. And that friction, or that learning each other's vocabulary, seeing the life through their eyes, which is so different than how I see it, or even our ways of living, we are sharpening each other. This is adorable. They told me I give them a lot of focus. They didn't realize that you can live with such focus. And they also said, we never realized, as people in their 30s, we had this agency in life. We didn't know that we could say we wanted things. We see you being really clear and saying, this is what I want for my family. This is what I want for myself. So they have learned that. And I said, in return, having that conversation, it's suddenly shown a light on, these are all the things I've learned from you. And I have. But if you don't take a moment, I love that question so much, Sandy, because if you don't take a moment, you don't know how you're benefiting. So I think between seeing Teo and being reminded of how every spare room kid has been so amplifying to our life, and then having that conversation and really valuing the village and the tribe together, it kind of changed our mindset that day. And it's just continued to take an upward spiral.
I'd like to take a little turn and talk about you and your husband. You described him as being this steady, measured person. You implied you're not. You're seeming like you are. But it sounds like you have a lot of differences that come together and make you a better couple. I'd love to hear how you two have navigated your own conversations around money. Since you've moved a lot, you're raising a child, you're taking in people into your spare room. Will you share a little bit about how you have navigated those conversations with your husband and specifically around money?
We're both kids of Asian immigrants. His parents are Korean, mine are Chinese. So neither of us grew up with money. So I think we come from a similar mindset. Neither of us takes anything for granted. I think that helps when we're coming from a little bit of a more even playing field in the sense that we deeply relate to the other person. When you grow up scrappy and you learn to make things last, you don't put your socks in the dryer because the elastic will wear. I don't know if that's even true, but even to this day, I still hang all my socks. I don't put them in the dryer. There are things like that that are hard to explain to people who have lived a life of great privilege, not right or wrong, just very, very different. I don't think we would say we are frugal, but being mindful and taking all that we have and treating it with a sense of responsibility. I think we both do that. I mentioned earlier, I got married earlier and never thought I would. The day I realized I think I want to marry him was the day that Leah, the very first girl who lived with me in college, the girl I just mentioned, she ended up back in the red light district and called me from a payphone because back then, children, we didn't have cell phones. So it was a payphone and she called my phone with a squiggly thing that was a landline. And I picked it up and she was not in a good place. So I was getting ready to go get her. And we had been studying late. He was sitting across the table from me. And when I looked up, he already had his jacket on. He gave me a Post-it note and said, write the address, I'll go get her. I remember thinking, yeah, he not only understands that I have this kid living with me, but he is so supportive and has the same mindset of contributing more than we consume. So I think that made me realize we would be really well suited, not only coming from a similar place as families, but looking to the future with the same desire to be additive to the community in which we live and to the people who we come in contact with.
Emily, tell us more about contributing more than you consume. How does your family keep track of that? How do you assess if you're meeting the goals you've set out for yourselves in that area?
Well, I think the most basic way is how you divide your money. How are you using it? So when we look at how much we need to invest, that's an easy math right now because of how much real estate costs in LA. I got that. But even when you're working out how your daughter splits her allowance, she uses an app that has 3 buckets in it. And so we literally make sure that she's contributing more than she consumes. So here's how much of your allowance you keep for yourself to use to buy ice cream or whatever you want to do. Here's how much you contribute, and you go define where you want to go contribute that. And here's how much you save. And the saving can be for future. You can define it later what you want to do with it. So I think literally putting numbers against it.
And say more about housing decisions you've made, because you've described the property that you live in today. Was buying a property with the features that you have intentional because of the way you wanted to use your space to help others?
We always did. So whenever we met a real estate agent, and if anyone ever listens, they will recognize, they're like, what do you mean you need to have a spare room with an ensuite? That was one of our primary criteria because we always wanted to have our guests have their own bathroom and not have to share if they didn't need to. So yes, that has always been a criteria. I'm a very transparent, direct person. So I grew up, you make as much money as you can, you put as much down payment as you can, you buy the biggest house you can afford responsibly within these parameters, and off you go. And that's how I did things for the first 10 years or so. And then, I went to China, and in China, as a foreigner, I can't own property. So I was renting. So I always thought when I came back here, I would immediately buy. So we came to Seattle for a year, and that's what we did. And then we had this epiphany because we ended up back in LA. And my first thought was, let me go find a house to buy. And I thought, why do I need to buy a house? Especially if I tend to move every couple years. And then when you do the math, you think it feels really wasteful to be paying rent and not putting anything into equity in something you won't get back. But the market is tough. Interest rates are very high. When you value agility and you think longer term, I may not be here. Suddenly renting makes all the sense in the world. So this house we rented. And it's been really lovely to live in for a year. And we also realized that we're off of Sunset Boulevard. If you don't live in LA, you still have heard of it. It's a nightmare to drive. Didn't realize how much of a nightmare until we lived here for a year. And so we're going to move. And we just found another house with a lower lease, but still has an ADU, attached dwelling unit for Tim and Hannah. We can all live there. We have to invest in the move, and that's time and money. but worth it because it's a little cheaper. It's going to be a better commute for my daughter, who's going to be a new driver. And it still maintains the flexibility for us because it's a shorter term lease. I'm now a gypsy.
You're talking about this alignment of values. It's really important that you found your next spot with the spare room. Share some of your top goals with writing a book titled The Spare Room. When people read it, what's the number one thing you're hoping that they walk away with?
Hey, I think I can do a little more. What would be a failure in the crafting of the book, and now we're looking at a film project, is if somebody said, wow, she's really great. That'd be terrible to me. I'm really not. I don't want people to look at it and think, whoa, that's something I could never do. That would also be failure. Rather, success is, oh my gosh, if she can do it, anybody can do that. So what's that for me? And then that's why I created this model of offer and offense as a Venn diagram. Your offer is that unique package of your skills, your experience, your personality traits. And your offense is like Leah that day sitting outside in the rain, beaten up. What is the thing that you can't drive on, that you can't walk by? I want people to read the book or see the film or hear this podcast and think, I have a social legacy. That's why the model is what it is. Because I found in conversations, the TEDx process is great because it really unpacks what is your idea worth sharing. And it made me realize people land in one of two camps. They either kind of know who they are and what they offer, but they don't necessarily know where they want to point. Or they have their offense, but they think, well, what can I do? I'm just one person. So that's why I put those two things together. And if you can define your social legacy and you look at our story and all the other stories in the book of extraordinary people, 24-year-old physical therapists to the first Asian American lead performer in Cirque du Soleil. I mean, these are all incredibly diverse stories that I had the privilege of meeting and telling. Suddenly you're like, I have something too. And I really want to go figure out what that is and go live into it because life is short. There's this Balinese saying that says 100 years, all new people. I'm 48. That's why I'm sort of at the point where I'm like, all right, how am I going to die empty? What else do I have to give? That's a much more meaningful question than what else do I want to hoard or store?
Emily, tell us, what's your next money conversation going to be and who's it going to be with?
Well, we did find financial advisors, coming back to the core of Money Talks, and we had a very different conversation with them. I had never had a financial advisor because I always thought I don't really care to hoard wealth. That's not really who I am. And then I talked to my friend Chuck, who said, yeah, but you can still have a financial advisor to help you plan. I mean, you can work against any plan you want. And I found that very liberating. So my goal was to work with my financial advisors such that by the age of 50, I don't have to work anymore. My college fund is covered for my daughter. And if I want to go completely nonprofit or just go speak without the fear of hustle to make my next meal, that I can do any of those things. That's my goal. Now, in 2 years, I absolutely do not envision I will be walking away from my job. I love it, but I have the freedom to if I want to. So my next conversation is probably with my husband because he's now running a nonprofit in Shanghai. People keep asking, when's he going to come to the States? In the last half hour, you've probably heard we're much more fluid than that. I don't know when he's coming to the States. He doesn't know. He's creating a nonprofit that is really meaningful and having impact in a marginalized society. And he's hired people with disabilities. And he sure as hell is not going to be leaving that job until he knows that they are all stable and not going to lose their meaningful employment if he leaves to come to the States. So we just need to continue curating this unique family experience we have that puts our daughter at the center still, that helps her feel really deeply loved and also proud of both parents that we are doing things that are meaningful and that help our family continue to grow.
Thank you for sharing so many of these stories that are very impactful and you lead by example. Where is the best place for our listeners to find you digitally?
There's a website and it has all the information about my book. It's where you can email me. It's social-legacy.com. So that's easy enough. If you go to Facebook or Instagram, it's thespareroom.Emily Chang.
Thank you for joining us on Money Tales. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Cami. Thanks, Sandy.
Thanks for listening to the Money Tales podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone you think would benefit from listening. And leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Your ratings and reviews help more people find our podcast. If you're inspired to gain clarity and peace of mind about financial matters, don't hesitate to reach out to our team at Aspiriant. Go to aspiriant.com/start a dialogue. Or you can email Sandy and me at podcasts@Asperiant.com. See you next time.